The stream is about to begin.
All right, my rated Ivy Right pupils. So as the Bob Ross of composition, I'm always talking about heuristics. And believe it or not, classic comedy shows and comedy routines such as Seinfeld use heuristics. So let me explain this real quick. So when Bob Ross comes onto the screen and he says, "Hello, happy little people. Today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage. And in the center of our canvas, we're going to include a New England wood-covered bridge going over a little babbling brook." Every time he talks about a specific landscape, when he defines it, he employs the wet on wet technique. And that's the heuristic he uses. For the college personal statement and in expository writing, you can likewise use heuristics. So what I'm going to show you in this video is how to use the heuristic of the comedic narrative thread to paint your landscape. You are the landscape, right, that you're painting in your college personal statement. So stay tuned, strap up, and check this one out. All right, my rated Ivy Right pupils. So I'm assuming that you all are familiar with Seinfeld, but if you're not, in particular, stand-up comedy routines. So in shows like Seinfeld and anything that Larry David created, you have what is known as the comedic narrative thread. Let me explain what that is, because it's a heuristic you can use to house your 650 words for your college personal statement. So let's take a comedian and put him on stage. All of a sudden, he begins to riff joke A. It's uproariously funny. We're slapping our knees. We're having a good time. And then poof, joke A goes out the window. It disappears. In comes joke B. We're still laughing. We're chuckling. We're giggling. And then poof, there goes joke B. And in comes joke C, right, which loops back to B and A underneath an umbrella thesis concept that comprises the whole gist of the joke. Well, here's the kicker. Seinfeld, the show, did that all the time. And it's a really simple concept. So usually in most episodes, the writers would couple George and Elaine, and they would have their own events going on. Just some scenario, some like cataclysmic thing going on in their external lives. And then you would have George and Kramer representing B and C. So as the show progresses, all four characters are interacting and weaving with each other around their individual stories underneath an umbrella thesis concept, right? So they did that in virtually every single episode that's ever written, and it is still, to this day and age, one of the better shows, one of the better sitcoms ever produced. So before I get into the exemplars, I want to kind of lay the groundwork for, with a couple of things. So as the college admission reps are reading your 650 words, you got to be mindful of something. Readers have a mind's eye, right? When we read your 650 words, we're rolling film and we're depicting you, we're conveying you, we're making pictorial images in our mind of you as a character, as an applicant, and a potential student on our campus. So you want to make sure that as you're rolling those 650 words, that the camera's on you. You don't want to get into the weeds and talk about extraneous events and all that stuff. The focus really needs to be on you as a character. And then the other thing, too, that you want to be mindful of, if you're familiar with stand-up routines or even Seinfeld itself or anything Larry David's done, right out of the gate, boom, you get a jaw-dropping opening line. So don't pussyfoot your way around the statement. Get in immediately, captivate your audience, and just rock and roll from the start. Another aspect that you want to consider is this, especially if you're applying to Ivy League and Patriot League schools or other elite schools. Everyone on paper is pretty much the same, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be applying to that school. And here's what I mean by that. You guys have similar numbers in terms of your GPAs, your ACTs, your SAT scores, similar extracurricular activities, similar resumes. So it comes down to your writing samples, the personal statement, and the supplements, and you really need to be authentically different. You need to stand out. It's a competition. So outwork, outpace, outsmart your competition. And then just kind of one little caveat here as you consider using this heuristic to house your 650 words, give equal treatment to all three threads. Now let's go back to Seinfeld for a second. In particular episodes, George and Elaine don't trump George or Kramer. They're all giving equal treatment. So you want to do the same with your threads, right? Have nice equilibrium between them. And then I'll end with this. It takes about 2 minutes and 47 seconds to read a college personal statement, 650 words. You want to make sure that you have an Oscar-nominated moment of brilliance on paper, right? So you got to practice all sorts of narrative theory and technique because this is very different than academic writing. So I have a ton of videos that help you with those narrative components. Study those and really become masterful at it. So enough of my pie in the sky, bloviating, talking into the ether. Let's say action and take a look at an exemplar here. So I had this student who applied to 12 very elite schools and he got into all of them and he ended up going to Princeton. And as we were ideating, I presented this heuristic to him and he's like, geez, tying three narratives together, that's a tall challenge. And I said, ultimately, you want to show the transformation and growth of your individual over years and ultimately get to this, that you are beyond ready to enter these schools and that you can be a contributing member from day one. So he started with a story, an anecdote about how he was really little and he used to have these meltdowns, these temper tantrums that were like of Chernobyl proportions. So he's the kid that would go into the supermarket and want, a box of Captain Crunch. His mom would say, no, you can have Wheaties. And he would just melt down. Like everyone would be looking at him. He'd be kicking and screaming and she would hurl him into the car. And his temper tantrums and his disposition inspired his mom to buy a book called Oh Crap, I Have a Toddler, tackling these crazy awesome years, no timeouts needed. So his parents had this parenting philosophy that timeouts don't work, spankings definitely don't work. So she started this book club, and lo and behold, 108 other mothers came to her book club and she facilitated it and she never gave the kid a timeout. So that is joke A, right? Narrative thread A. B is this. When he was like 6, 7, 8 years old, he got into trouble and his mom and dad said, all right, we're going to sit you on the couch, no popcorn, no favorite beverage, just you and the TV. And you have to implicitly understand why you're here and why we are making you watch Tidying Up with Marie Kondo. In that show, she goes over something called the KonMari Method. And it's a way of tidying up your surroundings, but in particular, tidying up your life so that the things that you do, the choices you make spark joy and genuine happiness in your life. So he's sitting there watching this and his parents said, you're going to watch 3 episodes. And after the first, he knew what he needed to do. So in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I'm going to go up to my bedroom with a whole bunch of contractors' bags. One of the bags is going to be for the garbage, and I'm going to, pick up all the figurines that are missing their limbs and Halloween wrappers from 2 years ago and just throw that stuff away. But there were so many things in his bedroom that no longer sparked joy. And he said, aha, I got it. Why don't I bring these toys to St. Jude's Children's Hospital? So later that day, his mom and dad hopped in the car and they drove him there and he handed out all these wonderful toys. And he talked about how that in and of itself sparked joy, right? Another comedic narrative thread that he brought in was this concept of Curai ni Saru. He went to a World Cup soccer game with his dad, and he saw, I think it was Japan and the United States playing together, and the Japanese side lost pretty mightily. But one of the things he observed after the game was that the Japanese fans pulled out of their bags and out of their back pockets garbage bags, and they all systematically, collectively cleaned the stadium. And he asked one of the Japanese fans why they were doing that. He thought it was kind of weird. And the Japanese fan explained the concept of kurai ni suru and the idea that this is a form of respect of the individual, but respect of the community. So what he did from here was talk about how all of these things led him to a great self-respect. He cleaned up his friend group. He got good grades. He respected his parents, really took care of his health, and has a tidy life, right? Because he respects it, just like the Japanese fans respected the stadium, and just like Marie Kondo talks about respect in her show. And then to bring A, B, and C all back together at the end, he finishes with a phone conversation he overheard his mom having with a book publisher. She wrote a book about how timeouts are ineffective, spanking really ineffective, and she wrote a book on how to raise fantastic teenagers. And the publisher, gave her the copyright to this. They published her. And she was really proud of her son, and he's really proud of himself. And that is kind of the credentials of the type of kid that we want on our college campuses. So he shows this evolution of self while weaving three simultaneous threads together. So that is how you do the comedic narrative thread, my friends. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to me at writeatibright@gmail.com. Know that I've been working with the college admissions process in some capacity or other for 25 years. So I worked college admissions with Brown when I was a graduate student there. I've worked for my own tutoring boutique in many prestigious tutoring boutiques that only hire Ivy graduates. So I've had my finger on the pulse for like 25 years. I've helped thousands of kids get over the hurdle into their top choice schools. So if you think I'd be a good study buddy, give me an email, writeatibright@gmail.com, and we can talk specifically about your needs and what I can offer. So I'm hoping that served you well and it makes sense. I will keep them coming. Take care.